Welcome, everybody. My name is Achim Boschedium. I'm head of exhibitions at Tate Modern. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here this evening to the 5th American Artist Lecture with Julie Mehretu and Tim Marlow. It's the 5th in a series. Previous artists have included Bryce Marden, Maya Lin, Richard Tate, who is currently installing his installation at the Turban Hall, and Spencer Finch. At which point I would like to thank particularly our colleagues at the American Embassy, Ellen Sussman and her team, and especially Virginia Shaw and Welmut Landstra for helping us to organize this event. I should say afterwards, after the talk, there's a reception upstairs in the East Room. If you follow the crowds, there will be drinks for everybody. It would be lovely to see you there. At which point I move on to introducing our speakers, and I do so against the background of one of Julie's wonderful works that recently entered Tate's collection, which we were very fortunate in Mogamma, a painting in 4 parts, part 3 from 2012, which was purchased with the help of some important supporters for Tate, Atencio, and Agademidian, Andreas Kurz, and the Tate American Foundation. And there's a second work which was acquired with the help of Pamela Joyner and Alfred J. Jufida. In terms of our speakers, I start with the interlocutor, with Tim. So just a couple of words about Tim Marlow. He was recently appointed the Director of Artistic Programs of the Royal Academy, a great, wonderful addition to the landscape of institutions in London. His remit includes the Academy's exhibition programs and the collection, as well as learning, architecture, and publishing. Prior to this, Tim was Director of Exhibitions at White Cube from 2003 to 2014, where he played a major role in evolving the program of the gallery. He worked with a great many artists at the gallery and beyond, and it's important to say that Tim has a long and distinguished track record as a radio and television broadcaster and as an author and publisher. He's lectured and chaired extensively in many different countries, so I'm sure we are in for a treat in terms of the conversation. Now, the real attraction, of course, why we're all here, is to hear Julie Mehretu speak about her work. It's interesting in the context of the present lecture, the American Artist Lecture, and we will come to that, of course, is Julie's biography. She was born in 1970 in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, and later on moved to New York City and to Berlin. She has received a Master of Fine Arts with honors from the Rhode Island School of Design and many, many prizes and awards, too many to mention, but always one which I think does it for me, which is the MacArthur Award in 2005, which is such an extraordinary thing to happen to any one artist. When I was thinking about the idea of an American Artist Lecture and how best to introduce Julie, I came back to an interview in the Guardian in 2013, in which Julie, when asked about her background, said, coming from this African background, you're the children of people who were there during decolonization, when the world really fundamentally shifted and this other form of modernism emerged. Now we're all dislocated, and there's this constant negotiation of place, space, ideas, and ideas. This other form of modernism is what brings us here tonight, so I hugely look forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Ellen Sussman. I'm the Director of Art In Embassies for the United States Department of State, and with me in the front row are Welmut Landstra and Virginia Shaw, who has been our chief curator for too many years to mention, and who was really responsible for the partnership that we enjoy with the Tate to bring all of you this American Artist Lecture Series. Akim gave some broad strokes, and I'm going to fill in with some others. Because we seem to never talk before we start about who's going to say what, I'm going to try to focus on some different issues. But as you know, we're very thrilled to have Julie here tonight as our 5th speaker in this series, and particularly looking forward to what Tim can add to the conversation because of his long background as a broadcaster and an art historian, which is a very wonderful combination. So Julie was born in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to a college professor and who was Ethiopian and an American teacher. They had to flee that country when she was 7, and she grew up in East Lansing, Michigan, which is in the middle of the United States, which has its own kind of culture. And after she went to school there, and I think probably her career path was already clear to her, she attended the Rhode Island School of Design, where she received her MFA and majored in printmaking and painting. She is known for her large-scale paintings and drawings, for layering different media, such as pencil and pen and ink, and thick streams of paint in compositions that reference, as Akim said, the contemporary issues of dislocation that we all face today, the issues of space and time and place. We at Art In Embassies are very, very proud to have Julie's work in some of our temporary exhibitions. For example, she hangs at Winfield House in Regent Park with Ambassador Barzan and his wife for the time that they'll be here. And she's also in our permanent collection in the new embassy in Addis Ababa, her old home. What I find interesting is how Julie has managed to teach and collaborate with others. Throughout her career, she's never lost that sense, probably of being the daughter of people who teach. So starting in the 90s, when she was a core fellow at the Glassell School program in Houston, Texas, she worked with others. She participated with 30 high school girls from East Africa during a residency in 2003 at the Walker Art Center. And perhaps you'd be interested to know that in 2007, she participated in a month-long program in Detroit with 40 art students. And I think this kind of work speaks more to who Julie is as a person and her idea of the importance that art has in creating conversations and looking at different points of view than anything else about her. She is the recipient of many awards, and I'm going to move on from the MacArthur and say that she can now add another award to her list. We are extremely pleased to be honoring Julie with a few other artists, but this January in Washington, D.C., where she will receive the United States Department of State Medal of Art Award for her participation to the Art In Embassies program and to just the fact that she is a genius artist. She lives and works with her partner, who is also an artist, Jessica Rankin, and their 2 sons in New York and Berlin. And we are very honored to have you here tonight. Tim Marlow is an institution. He's an institution here in London and Britain. I think that Akim touched on the big things, but what I didn't know was that he has written about art and culture for so many, many different magazines, but that in 1993 he founded Tate, the art magazine. And his show Culture Shock was on the air from 2002 to 2008. He has done many studies of living artists and artists who are deceased, as well as institutions like the Tate and the Metropolitan for UK television. So I want to welcome him here as well and say that I'd like us all to entreat them to have the dialogue begin. Thank you for joining us here tonight.
Good evening. Well, then, Mike and Julia, I just wanted to say how much I'm looking forward to this. Julie and I were talking about what and how we might proceed, and we wanted to have an organic conversation, and that's what we're going to do. But Julie was telling me that not so long ago, when she was asked to give a talk or take part in a panel discussion, one of her approaches was to read a series of quotes by various authors, from Ernst Bloch to Walter Benjamin to David Harvey to Fred Moten to C.L.R. James, as a way of throwing a spanner in the works, but also perhaps of showing the range of things that she's interested in and actually throwing a number of different ideas and arguments into the melting pot. She was going to do that tonight, and I quite like that idea. But in the end, because I think we want as much unmediated Mehretu as possible, what we've agreed is that Julie's going to begin by reading her own notes on painting, written in 2013, which, well, I'll let you hear them, but I've never heard her actually read them, but I've read them. There's something wonderfully poetic about them. So Julie will read those notes, and then we'll start the conversation. But if, on occasion, some of the montage occurs, or rather some of the ideas in her original montage occurs, then she may break off and start reading. Okay, Julie.
Okay, are we good here? Will it just begin?
Sure.
Okay. There we go. Wonderful. Okay. So yes, as Tim was saying, these are some notes I wrote after a talk that I did, and then needed to put something down onto paper. And because I didn't present it when I needed to actually put it into a written form for a publication, I actually went directly from the notes that had just jotted down and shifted a little bit. So I'll read these, and then we'll start the conversation. Push, scratch, mark, cut, stay. A mark, a scratch, the sound of graphite on paper, ink gliding out of nib pulled by fibers in the paper, on the surface of acrylic, like stone, like parchment. Never tabula rasa, always palimpsest. When drawing, pull out of myself, lose place, go deep into a pressurized state of disfiguration, disembodiment, lose all sense of cultural self, get lost inside a beat, inside a sonic, pulsing system of half-links, half-consciousness, half-wit, find the break. The hand equals an instrument, device. The hand, the wrist, the gesture, flow, play, spit. The hand can throw a bomb. Get at the strangeness of the future image experience rather than habitually view and decipher. Sensory experience, emergent sensile form, tactile, acoustic, auricular, lingual, sensatory, auditory, haunting knowledge. Premonition, draw faster, last chance. Oral clue. The studio equals a machine. Super, super loud of beats, breaks, compression, digestion. Serve intuition, impulse, improvisation. Symptomatic. The emergence of something new, from bits of now, past, place, data, mark, detritus, architectural parts, diagrammatic language, maps, lines, shapes, color, hue, synth, tempo, sonic, mutant, pressure, collapsed time, mind for resources, for parts to a future, refusing past tendencies and past actions that manifest into repeat patterns and repeat social actions, repeat repression, expansion of power, take the parts without judgment, break it, fuse it with marks, the creation of something other, a physical sensorial image that is a time-based emergent experience. Find the break, the gap, the fissures, the undoing and pulling apart, an open force of unraveling potentiality. Improvisation can be radical possibility. Painting is performative time. The marks are percussive, repetitive motions, marks that shift with each motion, faster, accelerating, to gain that wicked mass of marks, being that devour, consume, digest, and decimate their place. Until they morph it, shift it, fuse it, splice through, to find the break in the linear. The mark is insistent. It is. The map equals nonsense, entropy, which equals the sublime. Prove it futile as the marks themselves. The battle of the small mark and this long view of time layered, suspended into a long view back into painting, all suspended in transparency, in medium, in paint, desire. The compression of time, space, future, past, action, inaction, dualities and contradiction forced into one suspended time moment, splicing them together as mutant. The painting is performance in making and seeing and looking, the emergence of monstrosity. To look forward, the bits, the data, infrastructure, symbols of power, solder them onto the new machine, fuse the parts with marks that come and try to form something else legible, but descend into their own illegibility. The marks are comfortable with that. They create the headache. Conjure ghosts and parts, detritus data. The drawing has become tired and loose, mimics writing but not words. The new drawing has evolved out of the depth of past paintings into a surface seeping over a layered, stratified past. It has morphed into new disruptions in the surface image. The marks now drip, smear, print, stain the machine as it is scored and fused into the surface from above or emerging from within. The marks are convective. They cluster and clog and strain under and in the machine, infecting its coherence, its machinations. The marks are contagion, contamination, the fallout, stratagem. The language has loosened, blank notational. Opacity equals radical potential. Everything falls apart.
The idea that everything falls apart or the centre cannot hold is an African idea and a Western idea. Yeats, most obviously to my mind. Is that idea something that has evolved in your work so that by 2013, when you wrote those notes, things felt as if they were falling apart from the centre wasn't holding? Or does that apply to your work over the previous decade?
Well, I think in the work, the earlier work, there was this form that coalesced in the center of the paintings, and they became the paintings had this very kind of long view perspective, like bird's eye view perspective. Early map paintings and forms like that. And then as the architectural forms began to shift, at first they were drawings that you'd really see from afar, almost like really looking into this distant landscape, and then this aerial map, and the space would then compress in that way. And so the center always created this. There was a dynamic in the center which maintained maybe a perspective, not just a perspectival sense, but a type of social sense in the painting. And as I have continued to work with the erasure, then the center has completely has broken down into these other parts, and then something else can take place in that. So, I mean, for me, when you think of the center doesn't hold, or the center falls apart. I think of Achebe and his book, Things Fall Apart, and that it came from this idea, but also the total dystopic kind of entropic moment that has been so recurrent in a larger kind of global narrative.
So, looking at the most recent work, where there is a kind of almost womb-like void. That's not a contradiction, at the centre of the most recent paintings I've seen. That isn't a formal re-evolution. It's socially and politically engaged. It's part of an ongoing series that started, say, with the Arab Spring back in 2012. Or is that too reductive?
Maybe a little too reductive. I think that because at the same time in a lot of the new paintings, there's absolutely no center. In fact, there's almost a denial of a spatial understanding in the paintings. The marks have taken over the entire surface of very large paintings that are about 10 feet by 14 feet that almost feel like writing, where it becomes the space falls into a type of almost written form through the space. And I think that that's only in specific paintings that you see the center having that form again. But there's a formal use in painting and space and negotiation of like this enveloping space that happens with the larger paintings, where there are various centers, and there's this very decentered type of space that takes place. But I think where we look at paintings with this expectation of with a certain understanding of the center as having a different type of power in a way, and so I think there's certain paintings that play with this formally with the language.
You, in some ways, the perception seems to be that you work in series or in groupings at least. But I wonder whether you, when you start a painting, you're conscious of the grouping or the clustering in which it might later be seen, or do you start every painting as literally and metaphorically a blank canvas?
The work has changed so much this last year. The new work that I've made, but the previous paintings, they maybe evolved in a cycle. I would think of as so that each painting had a certain kind of architectural, conceptual underlying idea, and then the painting evolved from that place. The newer paintings have evolved much more from one painting to the next in terms of the surface, the material that goes into them, and being made from within a different place that emerged in the previous paintings.
Do you have a sense of why that has taken place?
Well, in the previous paintings, the architectural information provided this social metaphoric ideas around what the forms of architecture that were included, if they were a specific place or if they were taken from historic architectural drawings and plans, that all have very specific ideas embedded in them. The paintings, the more recent paintings, then with the Mogamma paintings, which are the paintings I made for Documenta in 2012, but showed again here in London last May. These paintings were really looking at the revolutionary square that had been a big part of the world stage in the last 3 years, and then also historic important squares. And then, but they're so layered that you couldn't decipher what was what. You could only see these parts. And the drawing completely decimated the architectural drawing in a way, or shifted it into something else where these other forms could emerge. The new work, I feel like, and I think of that other space and that other form as this third space. The new work is really being made from within that other form that comes through from those parts. So it's a completely, it's like a language coming out from inside this other form that I was most interested in, or the most haunting forms in the previous works.
So in a sense, you can strip the architectural structure, you can strip the skeleton, if you like, or the scaffolding, and drawing takes over.
Because I was also frustrated with the desire of trying to decipher these paintings.
You mean the audience trying to do that?
Yeah, and also that it became such a hindrance to the ability to just be immersed in the painting and have a kind of physical experience, or a really kind of time-based, slow experience. I think painting is very slow. And we consume images so quickly, and our ability to really stay in front of a painting for 10 minutes is you rarely see somebody look at a painting that way, and painting has operated this for such a long time. And so a lot of what I was interested in these paintings and the use of the amount of information that goes into them was to participate in this other type of experience that could happen. And I wanted to really move away from the desire to try and read them or decipher them.
Of course, I love that. I mean, I love the temptation and the gauntlet that you seem to have thrown down in those works, but in early works too, when you were perhaps quoting Leonardo drawings or whatever. But I quite like the idea that, in a way, you felt you hadn't obliterated them enough and that it got in the way too much. Does that mean, though, that you still have the same kind of imagery and ideas in your mind when you're working in the new way, but that you're not actually physically using them as a structure underneath? Or have you actually, in a sense, approached your process from almost the opposite pole, from just starting with the canvas and starting with the process of drawing? Even
with the paintings, with the architectural drawing, I didn't have a particular image in mind when starting the painting. And it was usually information. So I would have this archive of information, and I would choose from within that information an image to start the painting with, that I would project in the painting, that we would trace that drawing, and then layer upon layer, image after image. Those various drawings would construct a form of an image, and then the drawing that I would kind of go in with the marks into the painting would somehow work against and with that, or digest that and participate within that space to then create a different image. And I was always searching for this emergent image to come from within the painting, within the process of making. So in a way, I don't think the approach is so different. It just doesn't have the. And also, I didn't. There's a way to talk about the paintings with the architectural language that you really have, that you can really give language to. And I'm really wanting to move away from being able to have language, the proper language to work with the paintings, because what I think I'm interested in within the paintings is something that moves out of that, moves away from that. So, the Mogamma paintings, as you said, which you showed at Documenta, they look very strong, but in all those kind of group shows, they compete with other works. I mean, I think there were better ways of showing them
but they still stood out. In London, at White Cube, you worked with David Adjaye and put them into an architectural configuration. I wonder now, a year later, when you've obliterated all reference, at least temporarily, to architecture, whether that was a moment of closure of a particular aspect of your career then. I mean, did you find that successful, putting it in that architectural configuration? Did it suggest other ways that you might work or display your work? Or, as I'm implying or inferring, it closed something down?
I don't think it closed something down. I think actually I was much happier with that installation, and what it encouraged, because of the diamond in the space, you felt the kind of sonic reverberations of the dark gray voids in the other space surrounding the paintings, and kind of reinforced a way to look at the painting. And as a viewer walking in, you didn't confront the painting straight on. You had to turn your body sideways, and you were very aware of the shift of your physical being and its shift of this access of viewing for paintings that were the same scale. What I was most interested in those paintings was the way that the marks and the architecture formed a different form with their work together, and that's what I was getting most interested in and lost in. But what really seemed to take place, and what continues to hold those paintings in a way, is the architectural drawing really creates a distance from within the viewer and the space. You're looking, even if it's this completely immersive experience with their scale, you're still looking kind of into it. So I really wanted these other paintings. I wanted the marks to become enormous, so that there was a different sense of scale, that you were immersed in this language. You could be completely immersed in this space that felt like it could be an urban space or some other form of other natural type of form. And that came from within that drawing. So I don't think of it as a closure. I'm still working on paintings where I'm doing a lot of paintings right now dealing with the complete erasure of Aleppo, for example, and the buildings that had existed and happened. And those paintings operate very differently, but they're one part of the practice. But the part of the practice that I'm interested in to push this language further, or to allow abstraction to do have this other role, I think is really important to me.
I'm glad to hear that. I thought they looked wonderful in the gallery, and I think
Yeah.
as you read to us, and you talked about painting as performative, of course, the experience of that was more performative. The viewer became much more involved in a kind of drama, or psychodrama, or psychogeographical drama of some kind, or maybe that was just my reading of it. But I wondered, perhaps we could just unpick a little bit what you mean about the idea of painting as performance, because your process of painting is both a collaborative venture and an intensely private one, and I wonder how the two kind of meld together in that performative idea.
In terms of the performative, I'm thinking about improvisation and intuition, and working with a certain type of understanding of language, and then trying to form something new, trying to find an impossible within this language, trying to find this break. And so with layering the architectural drawings, even that process has a performative element to it, because one image from another, you're taking places that are so distant from one another, or completely don't have a particular kind of relationship, and forcing them together because of this idea. Or there's this aspect of the performativity in that sense, but also in the way that they become, and then in the way that you interact with them as a viewer, that the painting actually evolves in front of you through the viewing and the experience of the painting. That was another reason that I was very interested in making this space at the gallery in White Cube here, because in Documenta, the way that the paintings were displayed, you really moved past them, and you weren't encouraged then to spend more time with them. And so that's been a big interest of mine, how to encourage this type of the performative element within the viewer and the painting. What happens when you really start to look at the painting and you start to see other forms of ghosts or visual images that seem to play with a different idea of who you are, how you interact with the space, where it's not just this kind of quick reading and looking at the painting as an image. And that's where, I mean, and then also in the making, I mean, but we don't have to get into that.
Well, no, you do, and we're going to do that now. There's another very interesting remark, loss of cultural self. Now, loss of physical self might be a kind of a description of what sort of Pollock talked about going into a trance and sort of losing a sense of where he was or who he was. But the rhythm that took over is quite interesting in your idea of the beat. When you talk about loss of cultural self, are you talking about loss of a kind of analytic or controlling approach to how you use motifs and imagery? Is that what you mean? Or is it about obliteration of every aspect of your being when you're painting at a certain point?
Yeah, not every aspect of my being, but it's so hard to talk about making paintings, but
well, it's because it's such a varied process for you, isn't it? Sometimes it's detached. Sometimes the studio assistants are working. Sometimes then you're working on different layers.
And I make paintings, and I've made paintings from the beginning. The earliest marks come from a desire of trying to make sense of myself and trying to understand myself as an artist and understand my intention with making. I was making these very kind of gestural drawings, and then I started to reduce them into these very small marks to try and understand how I understood them and what they meant to me. In that process, there's the way that I almost interact with the world when an event happens, and you try and make sense of this event within a cultural understanding and lens and historical perspective, political, social reality that you try and decipher the world through this lens. There's a sense that there's an approach that has historically been a very Cartesian, kind of rational approach towards making sense of the world, but it's very clear that approach is also one that has a very strong colonial type of political intention behind it as well. And some of the quotes I bring up and use in the montage deal with mapping in that way. So if the work is this effort and this constant, there's the effort of really kind of trying to make without a sense of with a certain type of understanding of the language in a sense because of this more Cartesian practice in the studio of trying to make sense of what I have done, then the work then I can draw into the work to try and make sense of then every situation that I'm encountering that puzzles me or I'm trying to make sense of in the world around me, in a way to locate myself within that. So there's always been this kind of in and out in the process. There's these very opposing tendencies in the studio and in the process of the studio. So I'm interested in images of a place, or interested in why it resonates so deeply with me, why this particular problem might be so. And then trying to use these paintings as a way to somehow decipher that or to make sense of that for myself. So Joan Didion mentions once, she writes to make sense of herself and the world around her. It was this wonderful quote, I wish I had it here, but it's really the same reason that I feel like why I continue to make paintings, and what in the paintings, what can come about in an image that I didn't expect, that actually is much more profound than the language that I could have to articulate my thoughts or feelings about that particular situation. So it's that, and I refer to it as a gray space, a third space. It's this other form that emerges, so that the paintings that don't do that aren't as interesting to me. If they do something that has been done in the previous paintings, that kind of emergence hasn't taken place, and you don't learn something new then about the context.
When did you realize it in your life that you wanted seriously to be an artist?
I always made, but I think it was when I was in college that I thought I would like to try it. Wanted to keep going with it. And then right after college, when I moved to New York, I thought I would really try to find a way to make paintings. I was always working with painting, though.
It's interesting because it's very easy to over-analyse or apply someone's background, upbringing, and see everything that they do through the refracted lens of that. But Tate, I thought, in a beautiful short essay in your last catalogue, talked about the idea that the art is formed in childhood. What is interesting is then how childhood helps form the artist subsequently. And it is always said, and I think, with a great deal of intelligence, that your background, 7 years in Ethiopia before your family moved, that upheaval, the end of colonialization, the revolution and so on, and then finding a new home in America, or is it a diaspora, was something that could be read into a lot of your work, a sense for identity, that sense of flux and so on. Do you think that your paintings are often over-analysed in terms of your own personal cultural experience, or do you accept that they are inextricably linked and often it is a form of self-analysis?
I think in certain ways, when your work is described through your biography, it can be tiresome because there's much more that you're trying to investigate in the work. That my interest in the work, what I've been trying to investigate, has been not really linked to this biography that's very clear to me and who I am. But the ideas of the fissure and these breaks, this discontinuum, this discontinuity between realities and having to negotiate these various places, that break has been a constant kind of, it keeps coming back into the work. And it keeps coming back into any social situation in the world that I'm kind of most interested in understanding. And so I think that there's a contradiction in that there's this kind of constant link between who you are and how you interact with the world and the agent that you find yourself, how you end up participating in that world, and where you come from in that sense. But I don't think that, but I do also find it really problematic to read the work through a biography. I mean, there used to be this conversation around you travel a lot, so you make this work that it has to do with migration. I mean, I don't find that because my family migrated, that's why I'm interested in migration in the work at all. I mean, I think there's a contradiction in that, fundamentally.
Okwe and Ways included you 2-3 years ago in an anthology of African paintings since 1980. You're here tonight in your own terms, but as a representative of America. You're an American artist for the purposes of this evening. That's your passport. Does that kind of identity matter to you? I mean, do you feel an African artist, an American artist, an African-American artist, or just an artist?
I mean, firstly, I'm just an artist, but I think that I'm very clearly and take, I think, full responsibility for being an American. I think that one has to.
I think the State Department are relieved about that.
I think it's been a very difficult responsibility, I think, for the last 12 years, really, 14 years. And I think that a big part of the work of the last 7 years has really been, 10 years has been investigating, working from that place, especially since 2007. I think that, but I also am very much, very, focused on not focused, but you are who you are, and I'm of African descent, and I was born in Ethiopia, and I live in the United States. But I'm, So I refer to myself as Ethiopian, and I refer to myself as an American.
You have studios, and you work in New York and Berlin, and for a time, not so long ago, in Michigan. Can you work anywhere? Are you searching for a place that feels like home? Have you found home? Does that idea not matter to you?
I feel like, home is very important, and in many ways, Michigan is very much a home. It was the place, the East Lansing was a city I was raised in, a small college city that I was raised in. But I think that I like moving the studio. I like working in different places. I find that there are certain cities that I am able to work in and able to find the mental space to work in very differently. And then it's also interesting that when I live in very different cities, I'm who I am and what I'm in, how I start to really try and make sense of myself. It really shifts by where I am. So when I was living in Berlin, I felt very much an American in Berlin. And going back to New York, after having lived in Berlin, my focus and what I became most interested in terms of what was taking place in the world was taking place on the north of the African continent. And in many ways, there were repeat actions in that had taken place when I was a child. So there's this constant crisscrossing across the ocean and across, which I'm very interested in terms of historically also, this diasporic kind of charting and mapping, and what happens kind of with the mind in terms of that shift in space.
Which must have, the way you were just describing, must have some bearing, conscious and unconscious, on some of the work you produce.
More about how I was thinking about what architectural kind of interest what I was interested in exploring in the construction of the space in the paintings. So it informed that, or more in terms of the research that would go into the archive for the images for the painting, shifted from where I was. So my interest in Europe really, I mean, to go into Europe and really look at, immerse yourself in European painting, and then in the history of like within the center of Berlin, to look at to be an American citizen in the midst of in my mind, an illegal war that was taking place, and having to take responsibility for this situation in a country that had experienced in several ways these types of fissures, really intense, really, with major magnitude in terms of the world stage, that really shifted how I was thinking about. I mean, the role of erasure took place in the work in a very different way. The position of the architecture as being a type of space you could negotiate to just being these parts of architectural elements that would mix with the marks and flow through the painting in a different way. All of this shifted because of this kind of reorientation of understanding of self by living in Europe.
So when you said the hand can throw a bomb in relationship to your process, there is sometimes violent undertones in what you're doing.
We live in a world of violence, yeah.
But anyone hearing you talk now will be struck by your poise and measured thinking. You don't seem, I mean, there's a quiet anger maybe bubbling under, but it seems to me you're very in control
the mark
of that.
My interest in the mark on a piece of paper, that by itself is this mark, this kind of, that still could be this place of invention in a moment where neo-capitalism and neoliberalism is kind of dictating in so many ways and kind of infecting our own bodies. To be able to like sit down on a piece of paper and still be able to make a mark that could do something, that to me is part of the hand could throw a bomb. Like that these marks can actually behave in this context, and there's a possibility of something else through the breaks that could take place in that.
Is painting in any way redemptive for you?
I think it really is a way to figure things out. It's a way for me to exist in the world.
It's very funny. I asked Ansam Kiefer a similar question. He's sitting here now the other day about the purpose of it all. And he said that he thought that for him, not in his life, but in painting, he felt that the role of the artist was to be cynical, to be sceptical, to question sometimes the futility of it all and the way things are. Does that resonate with you?
I speak here of the futility of the marks and the futility of even the effort to decipher this, the futility of the effort to construct this other possibility, the contradiction in that, and the kind of confrontation with that contradiction, the kind of idealist desire in painting, the idealist desire in trying to build or reconstruct something else, and the kind of impossibility of that within itself is part of the bigger investigation and why I'm like continuing to want to make paintings and make art even.
Let's just go on to drawing, because you've mentioned how important it is now, and for Tasta Dean, she says it's the key to everything you do. And I was very struck by the fact that in a series you made, mind, breath, beat. This was done in Berlin. It was soon after Cy Twombly's death. I hadn't really thought about Twombly in relation to you, but then I thought subsequently, actually, if there's anything Twombly-esque about what you've done, it was there before the moment of his death. But was that a significant moment for you? Did it make you rethink, or was it just coincidental in the way Tacitus tells of the genesis of those paintings?
I think it was very coincidental. I had been doing these drawings, and then I had started several of them, and then I found out Twombly had died, and it was at the time I had been working on these drawings, so it was a complete coincidence. Those coincidences are always super interesting. I mean, the interest in the mark making for me and being able to continue working with the marks is the effort to try and, again, for the language to try and find something else within the language and within the image that I'm kind of chasing, this dragon that I'm chasing. Yeah, so that really, I mean, there isn't this there wasn't a direct relationship or kind of conscious relationship to Twombly at all.
And colour. Things have become more monochromatic in the last year, but in the past, work has been vibrantly colourful and then restrainedly colourful. Colour often is the last element in a painting that you produce. I don't mean to imply it's an afterthought, but how much is colour central to the way that a painting evolves, and how much is it something that has to be considered towards the end of the process?
Well, with mural, for example, color was supreme.
Yeah.
Instead of the marks as having this kind of a sense of supreme agency and possibility, the colored elements and all the quotations in that painting they determined the painting. Color in the more recent work, because of my interest in this, like I said, the collision between the architectural drawing and the marks and the other form that could emerge from within that, these works come from within that space, and so the surface that I've started with is completely gray or black. It's also, there's somehow paintings also kind of being made in the aftermath of the kind of collapse of the liminal or the threshold that existed during the time of if you think of 2011, the 18 days in Cairo, when Mubarak, when after 18 days of protest, Mubarak stepped down. This was a African, one of the main African dictators who I was around my entire life, basically, it was an impossibility to remove someone like that in the continent or really elsewhere without an armed without some force, some other sense of force. So to have a major street protest take down a dictator of that sort, who'd loomed so large in my life, there was this moment of this idealistic possibility that took place, even though instantly it was very clear that this revolution would be co-opted by the Muslim Brotherhood. So you have this kind of intense, and there's a cynicism in that you know that this threshold is only this moment is only this very, very, but there's this break that happens in that moment that I've been going back to and I keep going back to over and over. And then the complete loss of it, so there's this kind of, there's this gray space that exists in that. That's become like one of the dictating kind of places from which I'm working. So color just doesn't have I haven't had the need for it in this new language. And so, but it has to have a place. I don't know. It will come.
It's very interesting that hearing you talk about that particular moment and you using it over and over again as a kind of source of energy and inspiration. The idea of how art engages with the notion of history obviously is a complex one. And this is something that, in the last few months since I've joined the Royal Academy, I've had to rethink about, because history painting is one of the things that underpins that institution. It was something that Joshua Reynolds said was, the highest form of art. And so history painting, in a sense, is an aspiration in an old-fashioned academy. I'm quite curious about artists and their relationship to history today. Again, it's something I've asked various artists. And I don't ask you whether you think, in a sense, you're trying to wrestle with contemporary history in an academic way, that, as would have been understood in the 19th century. But are you, in a way, trying to wrestle with the notion of history painting and how we confront history? Or are you using contemporary history as a more energizing source for, you know, your own self-exploration?
In a way, it's an effort to make something from the crisis and disaster of the moment that you know, I talked about this idealism earlier that keeps kind of coming back into this desire that I have. So how then, within that, how can you invent something else when this kind of entropic, kind of really dystopic, entropic collapse is taking place, and kind of an insidious type of other forces kind of cannibalizing and devouring these kind of ideals in a way. And so how from within there can something else, can this image speak to this, and the image can question this or provide something else within that. So there's I think that for me it's impossible to make these with, I mean, I work constantly I read the newspaper every day. The images from the newspaper and from other resources are constantly in the studio. They're part of this process, this studio chamber of digestion and consumption that then get kind of, they get digested through me, and then in a way to make sense of these moments, I'm trying to make these images to help me find some way to speak of this, of my existence in this moment.
So the montage, which we began the talk by alluding to, a verbal montage, you have quite literally a montage of images in the studio, some of which seem resonant and relevant, others of which you will leave alone, but they just state and they may provoke ideas later on. They're visual ideas primarily.
Yeah, and markers, just markers or reminders. So during there are moments, like with the Ukraine uprising as well, where I have the news on in the studio constantly, and as I'm working, and I'm following very closely what's happening. Or there are other moments where the studio, it's a place of complete stillness or retreat, and you know, you kind of desperately trying to build something else with this knowledge. In terms of montage, I wanted to just read this one quote by Bloch about montage that I think applies. In technical and cultural montage, the coherence of the old surfaces is broken up and a new one is constructed. A new coherence can emerge then, because the old order is more and more unmasked as a hollow sham, one of surfaces that is in fact fissured. While functionalism distracts one with its glittering appearance, montage often exposes the chaos under the surface as an attractive or daringly interwoven fabric. In this sense, montage reveals less the facade and more the background of the age than does functionalism. So in terms of even thinking of history painting and its role and how to wrestle with that, I think even in breaking down even some of the desires that were implied within a particular type of narrative that was told within that is part of the questioning and process in this work here as well that I'm interested in.
We said we wouldn't speak in too much depth about individual philosophers, but I was thinking about Deleuze also as you were reading Bloch and that idea about time, image, and so on. And I wondered whether you ever had felt the compulsion to make film, because obviously that is one of the great mediums of montage. Why the compulsion to paint and draw rather than make film? Or might there be films made in the future? Or is your painting a distillation of a lot of the techniques anyway that certain experimental filmmakers use?
I'm so lost in painting and drawing, and it's a way that I would never say I won't make films. I'm actually interested in a particular film project having to do with looking at painting, but I'm much more interested in an investigation that happens within painting and making paintings and drawings and what I can explore through that. Then, so it's like painting, and it's chosen me in a way. So it's what I feel most like, where I feel the most sense of urgency or not urgency, but where I feel like where I have the most kind of intention in a way, where I can be most productive.
Once you're fully engaged in the process, when do you know when to finish? Does the painting tell you it's finished? Sometimes your work feels like it's part of a fragment of something much larger. It's explosive. Other times it's implosive and it kind of pulls you in. There's a whole variety of different effects and impulses it has. But I'm curious about that sense of finish. Is there a moment in the process where you think, yeah, I know where I want to get to, I know when and how I want to finish, and I'm going to work towards that? Or is the process almost always something that is, you're almost lost in it, and then there suddenly becomes a moment where it becomes clear that you've resolved the work as far as you can?
Usually, there's a moment that becomes very clear where the work is finished, and usually I keep working on the paintings. I mean, sometimes there's a 2-month gap between working on the painting and then going back to it. When the painting keeps kind of nagging at you, and there's this relationship of there's something that, and sometimes that discomfort, they really sit with it for a long time because that's what. But usually there's something. It becomes very, very clear if I have to go back into the painting. So, I mean, it's very hard to answer because with every painting it's very, very different. The only paintings where it isn't different is if there's a certain kind of rule for how the painting was made. But those aren't the way that I'm working now at all.
Almost every theorist on your montage has connections to Marxist thinking, or many of them do, and which is great, given this is sponsored by the State Department. I'm pleased by that. I was thinking less about the political ideology, more about the dialectic. Is a conversation, a dialectic, central to a lot of what you do? That's how a lot of commentators have perceived your work. Abstraction, representation, the mechanical and the gestural, even spatially as well. Do you see it as a dialectic often?
I see it as this. Yeah, there's been this constant struggle in the work between these two kind of ways of thinking and trying to make sense, or this idea of the kind of emergent utopia. This idea that keeps digesting itself, that keeps consuming itself wholly.
Construction, deconstruction, fabrication, erasure.
Erasure, yeah. This is constantly this, and even in my own way of looking at the painting, if I've made a series of marks, how quickly I work against them, how quickly they undermine, even before I've made them, the battle with the drawing. I mean, the battle between the drawing and I, and what happens in terms of their evolution, and letting the constant battle between my head and my hand. There's this constant work that is being kind of going back and forth for this other possibility. But it's the other possibility that's the interesting element.
That's the third space.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a trialogue. So let's get to the third space, which of course,
Trialogue.
I mean, on one level, there's George Brack's idea of pictorial space, which is the space that it's neither illusionistic nor real. It's the space that exists in pictures. In Cubism, it's the space behind the lettering, if you like,
yeah.
which seems to exist, hover in between reality and illusion. Homi Bhabha also has this idea, doesn't he, of the third space in terms of a kind of postcolonial agenda. Does that culturally it interests you, the idea of a third space, as well as something formal?
Well, there's a moment of there's a necessity of a different form. There has to be this other form, whether it's painting. In my work in painting, it's how I feel, like I said, most capable of trying to understand this. But in a bigger sense, there has to be another form of another. There has to be some, or there's just this kind of internal digestion. And maybe that's what it is. This constant kind of digestion of we are eating our own tail in that way. But for me in the painting, there has to be. This is maybe this kind of the idealism that Tate brought up in that text. But there has to be, and I don't know if this is the haunting of coming from from a generation that was very, very, very informed by the possibility. They were completely invested in the rebuilding of a new possibility that was completely devoured, as many Africanists were in the 60s and 70s, and the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and then the 80s went into a complete decade and decades of complete dystopic realities and corruption, and you see this also in the U.S. right now, where government can't function, where there's a complete problem in terms of the way that the citizens and government are interacting, and the way that this is getting kind of consumed. So this entropy exists on so many levels, and it's existing globally on so many levels. This kind of world in crisis that we're in. So, for me, the effort to keep making is within this kind of insistence that something else has to give in there somehow.
Which artists feel kindred spirits? Which artists do you feel closest to? I mean, there may be those working today. It may be a historical artist.
Always the question.
Well, it's interesting because Richard Tuttle, I know, is an
Yeah.
artist that you have,
Yeah.
certainly in the past, we've talked about him and he's installing here. Malievich is upstairs, and I wonder whether, the resonance of suprematism or moving into abstraction and then returning to figuration and so on. But, I mean, just those two, for example. Polka.
Kiefer. Yeah, I'm most interested in artists that I feel are negotiating these various contradictions of reality and social politics, with a real commitment to making art, to making something else with art and with what it can do. So David Hammons is also another artist that I have a lot of respect for and am amazed by. And you named a few others.
Mark Bradford.
I feel like we're both making paintings, but I feel our approach and our interest and how we work is very, very. I don't feel the same kind of connection with the work that I think there was maybe there's an overlap in terms of mapping at one point, but I feel. Yeah, I'm much more interested in, right now, the Thai movement in painting, and looking at certain aspects of how, you go through these kind of cycles of what becomes really interesting or important or feels like it has the most activist kind of capability within this kind of very limited form.
Both your parents were teachers, as we heard earlier, and you have a clarity of thought and expression that would serve well as a teacher. Does that interest you? I mean, is there an element of, I'm not asking if your art's didactic, but is there a sense of wanting to get certain messages across, and the idea of teaching, you think, perhaps underlies a certain amount of what you do?
In terms of the painting?
Yeah.
No, I think that for me that somehow that I would hope would never be the case. I hope the paintings are more about other types of questions and efforts to create a different, something else. But I think that teaching and working with students is always interesting, in that there's this constant evolution that can happen, this back and forth, especially with particular types of students of different ages. And but there's a kind of give and take. I mean, I work with various assistants who some of them have really kind of been close with for a long time in their work and their practice, and there's this constant dialogue that happens between me and them. I don't teach right now, and I don't have that position. But in terms of the painting offers something else. It doesn't come from that position. In my mind, it's similar to a lot that's said about my father as being an economic geographer, and that coming through in the work. Like, is it because I was exposed to a certain sense of geography that I'm interested in maps? And I think that the way that I've always worked with map making has my interest in understanding space has maybe been informed by a certain way of thinking, but I don't think that it has a relationship to the painting. in that sense, in a direct sense, as informing it.
Finally, just before I throw it out to the floor, you mentioned your assistants in the studio, and there's a varied energy in the studio. Sometimes there's music, sometimes there's quietness. Your assistants, there's a great rapport often between them and each other and you. And I wonder whether that sense of playfulness resonates at all. I mean, I know that, again,
Yes.
one of the Montage quotes is, you talk about Virilio's idea of play as something in terms of games, but also in terms of a sort of mechanistic idea of the play that something has in its casing. But are you exploring the idea of play and playfulness in the process of making art?
Yes. And that what the way that the work has been able to evolve, it would have been impossible without the use of and the contribution, collaborative efforts of these assistants that I work with. Some I've been working with for a long period, 10, 15 years. Some are to come in for a very short period of time when we need certain types of work done. But in terms of whether it's the surfaces or the exploration of how to put down other architectural rendering, in terms of the large mural painting, these all come about because of this kind of playfulness in the studio, and even this painting that went in a particular direction of all these erased plazas in Berlin, went into a particular direction because of the hands of two of the assistants who just worked on this painting for a year and a half, just this painting, because of their capability of drawing a particular way, and what started to happen within the underpainting and their hand. I mean, this is just like, including the inversion of space. So you constantly have these spaces where you have the reflection of the space folding in on itself, part of its own digestion in a way.
And what about becoming a parent? I'd ask this of both men and women, but also you have a studio at home and you also have a studio downtown. Has there been any discernible idea of the play of children, or a shifting approach to what you do subtly as a consequence of having witnessed, two young children growing up and their own obsession with mark making and play and so on?
I mean, their children, the way that they work, it's incredible. And so rather than to speak directly to that, I'll say that before we had children, somebody said to us, no women mothers were good artists, or something like this.
I think I know who that was, actually.
Did she? That same quote? This was something that
Tracy
Simpson
Emin
me.
said it recently as well.
But then I just asked, there's many who have. And many who, Sylvia Plath is an example of just, whether she continued to mother is another thing, but there's so many who have. So it was a really kind of outrageous statement that was said. And I've found for working that I've made more work and more the investigations that have been able to happen, the kind of a freedom that's evolved in the studio because of a certain kind of rigorous schedule, but raising children and the witnessing of this, having this child who's like a little Buddha in the house. You learn from this. This is one of the most incredible experiences that I've had. So it has been one of the most informing experiences in the studio, and I love having them in the studio. But more than anything, the kind of formation of a life, watching not in formation, but the evolution of this life, this kind of, it forms itself in so many ways. You only can provide some kind of context for that.
That was a wonderfully indirect answer. Let's take questions from the floor. We've got about 15 minutes. Other questions people would like to ask Julie from the floor? There's a microphone coming round for those who might want to ask. There's just here at the front.
I believe that in the Mogamma series there are some drawings that were of Zuccotti Park as well as some of the squares in Cairo, and that you were working on that series shortly after you'd finished the mural for Goldman Sachs. And I've always been intrigued about what it meant for you to think in the same couple of years about making a mural for a lobby of a large bank. There we have it, over there. And the site of the Occupy movement, and whether, as well as, we've been seeing lots of images of places of civil unrest, of great disturbance and destruction, whether global finance is also been important to the way you compose your paintings, or just what that meant to make that work in that place and to be exposed to that community as well?
There's such the possibility that could exist in making mural, a painting of that scale that operates in an urban fabric that has this kind of participation within it. You can see it from 5-10 blocks down the road. You can see it as a small painting. And the site of that painting being embedded in this financial institution, in the center of finance, and what was this, it historically has been part of the fabric of New York City down in that part of Lower Manhattan. All of these were very kind of really interesting sites for me. What became, and then you have also, it's right across from where the World Trade Center was, and what took place on that charge site. So you have this constant relationship to these realities. So for me, there's a situation where painting rarely has that privilege to operate in a public space in that way, as painting. And then the other interest in that is that there was this effort within that the entire painting was constructed from the history of the architecture, of the internalization of the marketplace and the architecture of finance, and these forces kind of trying, and then the drawing trying to, and the color and the shapes trying to deal with this reality in a way. At the same time, you have a year later, not even, you have, after it was installed, a few years later, you have the eruption of Zuccotti. 2011, this was installed in 2009. While this painting was being made, we had the collapse that took place economically in end of 2007, 2008, that summer. So while this, 2008, while this was taking place, my interest in those two contradictions of being able to kind of negotiate these realities at the same time, and that they're forces at play, with as much, like one has actually much more power in a way than another. I mean, the Zuccotti and the Occupy movement was completely devoured in the same way that the revolution that has taken place in Egypt has been completely kind of co-opted, so that moment disappears. But there are these breaks that are provided within both of these fissures that I'm interested in. So in terms of like, and does world finance participate in the violence taking place in the world? I mean, I think that's completely evident and clear. I think that's part of the interest in the investigation. But those contradictions and the breaks in those that I'm most interested in, because I don't think that what I say about past actions and repeat actions, and I think that if I find one other quote that I think treats this whole concept really carefully, because I think what you're bringing up is those two types of contradictions. But I don't know if I'll find it. But Stuart Hall, I think, really deals with these ideas of inventing a politic and a way of working from within the experience of these moments, within a technology and the experience of what's happening, so that what Zuccotti kind of could offer in the end was a repeat pattern and a repeat gesture within a space that was also the intention of what it was opposing. There's these. Does that make sense?
Was the experience of doing site-specific work, was it something that you would like to do more of? Or did it feel quite restrictive?
No, it didn't feel restrictive at all, but I think it would be something, I mean, I would be interested in
Depending where it was.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this wall nagged me. At first I had said no to this idea, and then it kept coming back to me, this incredibly long wall that was almost the length of a city block, half of a city block, that you could actually pass by this through your movement in the city daily, and that the people who worked in this institution, who really service this institution, it's like a small vertical city of 10,000, 12,000 employees, most of which are service employees who service this building in the way that they do a city. And so there's kind of daily interaction with that type of a painting was really interesting to me in terms of what also was embedded in the painting, all the kinds of language and information.
Is there a spiritual dimension in any way to what you do? I mean, I asked you this in a...
And I answered somebody, I don't believe in anything.
Good. but when you produced the Mogamma paintings with David Adjaye in that space, there was something shrine-like or chapel-like.
Yeah.
Does the language of art's engagement with spirituality in the past interest you? Is it something that you...
It's part of them. It's definitely part of the history, the way painting has been considered, and it's been a part of this history for a long time. So that's one of the aspects of Montage that I work with in terms of how painting has existed, how you respond to a portrait form painting, and how you respond to a horizontal landscape painting, how you respond to a painting that becomes the space, how do you respond to a painting that out. These are parts of painting that have existed and parts of understanding a picture that have existed for so long that yes, they become part of the language of what you're trying to deconstruct and work with at the same time.
We may, therefore, if there are no more questions... Oh, there is a question. Here's the microphone.
Do things recur in the studio? I mean, things that you don't plan. There are always things that you plan and you intend and that you're working towards and for. Do you find that things recur in spite of you?
Yes.
Good.
Such as?
Well, the structure of the center that we were talking about, this kind of the spatial elements that keep kind of imposing themselves on the painting. I feel like I work really hard against them, but then there are times. There's also like going back to the insistence of the mark. This kind of effort to keep going back to marking in a particular way. When you want to try and invent a different language within yourself. But I'm interested in that insistence. I'm interested in when that happens over and over, really trying to understand what is that is taking place that happens despite yourself.
What about your subconscious? I mean, are you interested in the way that it manifests itself at all in your paintings, or you don't believe much in that? In your montage of quotes, there's a lot about dreaming and reverie and sleep, and of course, automatic mark making has those kind of overtones of a means of exploring the subconscious. But that was 80 years ago. Does that again resonate with you?
I'm very interested in what happens with chance. I'm interested in these kind of what happens in the studio, in the paintings, that will speak to in a way, will give language to my feelings around a situation that I haven't really been able to properly give verbal language to, and so I'm very interested in this, in that when that takes place in the studio, and I think, like I talked about improvisation and intuition being such a force in the studio and being kind of a servant to impulse in that way, and I think that what I mean by that, and Matthew Hale said it so beautifully, be a true servant to impulse, because he sees it as symptomatic to the external world and the interior world, and the location somehow a way to be able to find some form to link the two. So I'm very interested in how this happens, in how the language has emerged with me in terms of that. Yeah.
Do you have a sense now where your creative journey will take you in the next 2 or 3 years? Are you looking at very much in the next month in the studio? Or do you never think in those terms until you actually get back into the studio?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really trying to not think in those terms. I mean, there's some ideas of projects. There's a project that I will work with Peter Sellers' first stage project, so to do stage design, stage and costume design for this next opera that he's doing that are based on 2 Japanese nos. And he spoke to me about them because of the language in the nose. So I'm very interested in how that will, what will happen in the studio with that process. It's a very different process, but and then in the painting with the new work, I just finished a body of work, and I just installed a show of paintings, and I'm still in a place of understanding them. And so in terms of next steps in the studio, I think I'm trying to keep it as open as I possibly can. But I also have many paintings already progressing in the studio that I've been working on for the last year.
So have you ever had significant creative block?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I work a lot, and I almost draw almost every day. I mean, it's like an insistent kind of way of making, and yeah, I mean, so there are times where I wanted to make a series of drawings this summer that just didn't work. I couldn't do them, and then in the end, I ended up, the entire time I was traveling through Australia, I wanted to make these travel drawings. I've always wanted to make travel drawings, and I never can make travel drawings that I'm interested in. And I always collect all the materials that I'm going to take with me, and I want to digest place through. And then I came back to the studio in Berlin, and in a matter of weeks, I was able to make a cycle of drawings that I needed, that were really very different than anything I expected. And for me, were some of the most exciting drawings that I've done for what they're teaching me. But I don't think the earlier part of the summer I was able to do anything that was of any use.
There we will finish. The show that's just opened in Berlin. There's also a show on in Sao Paulo. But we look forward to the collaboration with Peter Sellers and maybe a major retrospective or project show in an institution at some stage in London. Julie Mehretu, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.